This story happened to me many years ago when, at the age of 19, I finally got out of the army and partied with my girlfriend after her brother broke my nose. Out of harm's way, I decided to move to the big city. My mother arranged with her groupmate and friend from the chemistry department, with whom she had been in touch for the past 18 years, that I would live in her apartment in a house that was about to be demolished. Mom's friend had already gotten an apartment, but the old 5-story building had not yet been completely resettled. The gas and light had not been turned off, and she still had the keys to the old apartment in her hands. She also helped me with the courier job. I planned to spend this year studying at one of the technical colleges. I couldn't make it in my hometown. Right after graduation, the girl I was dating told me she was pregnant, and we started getting ready for the wedding, which never happened. The pregnancy was fabricated, and although I forgave my girlfriend, our love story had caused me too many unnecessary problems. And in the end, when the relationship became completely broken, despite the help of her parents and my mother, I decided to change my life. Miss Mallory Forrest and her husband met me at the train station, helped me carry my things to the apartment, and handed me the keys. So, I became a tenant in a small 2-room apartment on the outskirts of the city. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old 5-story building. There were 15 apartments in the entrance, and only 4 of them still had been inhabited. A luxury residential complex was being built not far from the group of 5-storied buildings that were being demolished, and the developer hoped that before demolishing, he would settle migrant workers in the empty buildings, at least for some time. They put a bed, an old TV, a refrigerator, and a closet in my apartment. There was a stove and a set of dishes. In the hallway, there was a massive solid wood drawer left over from the set. A telephone line worked. The internet was available, but there were some problems with the connection. Miss Forrest left me her phone number, gave me time to adjust. I must say that I had never met Miss Forrest before, nor had I met her husband, but I had heard a lot about them from my mother. Our first acquaintance left me in a state of euphoria. They knew a lot about me and had made thorough preparations to make my life more comfortable. I had no neighbors on the landing and none on the 4th or 5th floor. On the 1st floor, in one apartment, lived an old lady and her deaf-mute son. In another, an old alcoholic. On the 2nd floor was a young family with a child and a single woman in her 60s. Mallory told me that the people who moved out were those who were satisfied with the conditions offered and who managed to get a more comfortable apartment. The neighboring entrances weren't crowded either. During the first week, I saw at most 5 people in our house. Those days, I didn't leave the house, only to the store for groceries, and went to apply for evening courses at the chosen college. Mr. Forrest even provided me with a certificate of my work for his company. Life seemed to be quite interesting and fulfilling, especially because Uncle Rob's office, as Mallory's husband asked me to call him, was full of youngsters, and the work itself promised to be not too burdensome. Uncle Rob was a joker. It was obvious that women liked him. He earned money easily and was eager to share this knowledge with me, since he and his wife never had the chance to have children. I had been living in the apartment for almost a week without incident or trouble, when suddenly, the day before I went to work, I woke up to a strange noise. Something had fallen in the apartment upstairs. I didn't pay attention to that. You never know what can fall in the apartment. But when I woke up, for some reason, I began to listen carefully, and suddenly it seemed to me that I distinguished footsteps right above me in the apartment, which was empty and closed for a long time. Someone walked from the living room into the kitchen, stopped, came back, walked again, and turned silent. I didn't hear any more footsteps. As a result, I fell asleep in about 20 minutes, having no time to think of any logical explanation for the strange sounds. The next few days passed rapidly. I got into work, got to know the guys from Uncle Rob's firm, went to a course where, by chance, on the first night, in one of the corridors where I was wandering, looking for my classroom, I met a girl, a 17-year-old named Alice. Having bumped into Alice a second time, one evening the next week, again in the corridor of the college, I thought this was my chance and asked for her phone number. That evening, I returned home later than usual. I walked from the subway to my house and thought about Alice. I passed a gray-haired, unkempt beggar in dirty clothes, put all the change from my pocket into her outstretched hand, and walked in the direction of home. I heard something like, "God bless you," but I didn't even turn around. My thoughts were completely absorbed by Alice. She's a beautiful girl, blue-eyed, slim, in tight jeans and a black turtleneck, hiding her obviously large breast underneath. I kept thinking about the color and expression of her eyes. I remembered those eyes from the first time we met. There was something special in them, and in spite of the smiles we had exchanged, there was a deep sadness in the girl's eyes. When we ran into each other again in the corridor, just as unexpectedly as the first time, we were both frightened at first. Then we laughed. By all means, I decided that I needed to have a relationship with this girl. I wanted to get to know her better, to finally date her. Why not? I even had a place to invite her if it ever came to something serious. With these thoughts in mind, I approached my house. It was already dark outside. The lighting in our neighborhood was terrible, and the roads were broken from construction traffic. As I approached my house, I looked up to my window. Of course, there was no light, nor was it on the entire 4th and 5th floors. Suddenly, I thought I saw a shadow flicker in the window above my apartment. Damn, what a shadow. It's dark. The lights are off. I might have imagined it. I stepped into the entryway, lit by a dim light. Hell, it was pitch black above the 2nd floor. I reached my apartment in complete darkness, fumbled for the key, stuck it in the lock, opened the door, and entered. Shit, I shrugged. It's getting a little chilly. I turned on the light, got undressed, and walked over to the radiator. Sure enough, it was cold. There was no hot water either, so I boiled the kettle, stirred the water, and washed my face. I ate cold cutlets brought by the caring Mrs. Forrest, who, from the first day, despite my objections, sought to feed me, and sometimes visited me without warning. After an hour, I got strange nausea. I tossed and turned in bed for a long time, not feeling sleepy at all. After a while, I went back to bed with a heavy headache. Damn cutlets. I had to give up the overcaring of Mallory. I'll make it on my own somehow. Suddenly, there was another noise in the upstairs apartment. I looked at the clock. Holy shit, it's 1 in the morning. Something had fallen down, and again I heard footsteps. I got goosebumps running down my back, either from the cold or from fear. Someone was upstairs. I could hear the heavy footsteps clearly. A sense of dread tossed me in my bed, and I sat down, wrapped in the blankets. The footsteps stopped. Someone was standing on the 4th floor, right above me in an empty and locked apartment. I sat like that for another 10 minutes, listening to the silence, trying to figure out if I was really scared. I finally drifted off to sleep. As I lay back down on the bed, I closed my eyes, and suddenly, I heard some kind of rattling outside the front door of the apartment. I must say that the acoustics in old 5-story buildings, especially the empty ones, increased dramatically. Jumping up on the bed again, I went to the door and put my ear to it. Since there was no peephole, I heard nothing but silence, and suddenly, just as I was about to pull my ear away from the door, I realized I clearly heard someone breathing. I got goosebumps all over my body, and my hair stood on end. I froze in front of the door, on my tiptoes, wearing a blanket, and with a completely insane expression on my face, which I saw in a mirror in the hallway. The moon was shining from the kitchen, as slowly as possible. Trying not to make any noise, I backed away from the door and ran to the bed, grabbing my cell phone from the drawer in the hallway. When I got to bed, I looked at the screen and saw that Alice had texted me. When? Damn, more than an hour ago. Alex, I'm sorry for texting so late, but I'm very sad and lonely. I'm in a lot of trouble. I was wondering if we could go out tonight. I decided to contact her in the morning. When I woke up, I called Uncle Rob and told him I was intoxicated. He sighed but gave me a couple days to rest. After talking to him, I immediately got a call back from Mrs. Forrest. Are you alright, Alex? Yes, Mallory. Do you know who lived in the apartment above you? My friend and her daughter live there, said Mrs. Forrest sadly. Unfortunately, her husband died, and she became a heavy drinker. She became addicted to alcohol in a couple of years. We were neighbors and helped both her and her daughter with money and food. Her daughter had just entered the institute. She had so many plans for the future, but she couldn't bear what had happened to her parents and committed suicide. The girl was found because of the smell that the neighbors couldn't stand. When the neighborhood policeman came and opened the door, they saw that the girl had slit her wrist in the bathroom. She was lying there, poor thing, already starting to rot. It happened a year ago. We were vacationing with Rob at the time, and her mother had disappeared. The neighbors had told us all the details. The mother was found only a month after the girl's death. They said she had been intoxicated by alcohol. We all agreed to pay for a cremation, first for the daughter, then for the mother. They had no relatives, and no one lived in the apartment after that. I hung up the phone and gave myself a pause for thought. Then I got dressed, closed the apartment, and went up to the 4th floor. It was 11 o'clock in the morning. As I approached the apartment above me, I pulled the door. It was closed and there was nothing special about it. Then I checked the other apartments, and they were all locked. When I got down to my floor, I looked carefully at my door. There were no marks on it, except for, what's that? I noticed some brown stains on the floor below. Dried blood? Yeah, it looks like blood. I went downstairs to the apartment where the young family lived and rang the bell. Who's there? A woman's sleepy voice was heard. Could you please open the door? I'm your neighbor's nephew. I live upstairs. The door opened, and a shaggy young woman stood in the doorway. A baby whimpered in the back of the apartment. Hello again, and sorry to disturb you. Did you hear anything last night? I asked. No. Why? The young woman looked at me in astonishment. There's nobody here, and we're moving out the day after tomorrow. There were some guys walking around. Construction workers. Seems like they're going to be settling in. Ah, okay. Thanks. When the door closed, I called the apartment next door, where an older woman lived. When she opened the door, I was surprised at how bad she looked. She was in her 60s or 70s, with short gray hair, pale face, and thin lips. I introduced myself and asked the same question. Are you Robert and Mallory's nephew? Well, not at all, I mumbled. Miss Forrest is a friend of my mother. It's a long story to explain. Come on in, the woman said. I entered the neat apartment. Into the kitchen, she added. Do you know what happened here a year ago? She suddenly asked me, pouring some tea. Yes, Miss Forrest told me. The lady squinted and grimaced. Did she tell you that it wasn't her neighbor's husband's daughter, but her own? It was Rob's daughter. We all know. And she pretended not to see how alike they were.
Robert used to run away from his wife to her neighbors when her husband was away on business. Rob even used to take off work to see his mistress. He's a bed hopper. When her husband died, it was Lori who made her alcoholic. She's the one who's guilty. It's her fault the girl killed herself. The teen asked for help and couldn't pay back the money her mother had borrowed. So Lori pushed her crying out the door and threw her down the stairs.
I almost choked on my tea. Uncle Rob had a daughter? Excuse me, but where was the girl's mother? Where was she? The elderly woman sighed suddenly, and I saw tears glisten in the corners of her eyes.
No one knows. They found her a month after they found her daughter. Drank herself to death. She was a good woman, though she loved the wrong man. She used to love her daughter dearly. Her husband used to beat her when she was alive. He also knew she was cheating on him. I felt sorry for the neighbor after her husband's death. Even though he was cruel to her, he never harmed the girl. I always took care of the child. It was hard for the girl to live in such conditions since she was just a teenager. She got into college without any support. Unfortunately, she couldn't take it and broke down. What a beauty she was.
Did you happen to hear anything at night in the entrance hall? You know, strange noises, grinding?
No, young man.
The woman sighed, and I suddenly saw her shoulders slump and her head droop.
I sleep with earplugs.
I left her with a kind of heavy head and sad thoughts. I texted Alice, confirming that I would be at the college at 10 p.m. tonight. She was supposed to be there too. In the meantime, I tried again to talk to the other neighbors, but from the first floor, there was essentially no one to talk to. The old lady was senile, her son was mute, deaf, and drunk, and only their next door neighbor, the old alcoholic Uncle Gary, as he called himself, admitted that he suspected that our neighbor had been killed, probably by Uncle Rob or Mrs. Mallory herself. Uncle Gary had been drinking with her several times. She complained about threats from Lori, who, though smiling to her face, hated that woman for having once slept with her husband. My attitude toward Uncle Rob and Mallory changed dramatically over the course of a day. I suddenly began to remember both the caring and cradling voice of Mrs. Forrest and Uncle Rob's cheerful, energetic style of communication. So what do I know about them, besides that they took care of me and accepted me into the family? And my mother, when was the last time she saw Mallory? I suppose more than 15 years ago, and then only occasional letters and Skype calls for the last couple of years? I went up to the apartment and wondered, called my mother, and asked what she knew about her friend. Mom hesitated. Alex, I should have told you a long time ago. Did you meet Robert? What do you think of him? He's a kind man. Only the neighbors say bad things about him. Alex, I wanted you to be friends with him. That's why I kept in touch with their family. He's your father. Does he know? I jumped in surprise. My mother raised me without my father. From her words, they hadn't worked out since college. I never looked for him, never asked many questions. And suddenly, the bits of the puzzle began to fall into place. He knows, Sonny, and so does Mallory. We were dating. Then I got pregnant, and he had an affair with Lori behind my back. I went to my parents to give birth to you, and they got married. I was in so much pain, but the resentment went away when you were born. Rob always sent money for you, and now he wants to include you in his business. It didn't work out between him and his wife. God never gave them children. After talking to my mother, I spent a long time thinking about what I've learned. Not only did I find my father, but I also found out that I had a half-sister. I wondered what she looked like. What was she like? I decided to try to get into a locked apartment, but I would do it the next day, as I had to meet Alice. I arrived for my course at the college. Alice wasn't there yet. I looked impatiently at the phone, waiting for the text message. When the class was over, I rushed into the hallway, but it was empty. I stayed waiting for her in front of the classroom. She showed up at 10:30 p.m. Was it just me, or was she crying? Alice, so what happened? Alex? The girl's voice was very sad. It looked like she was about to cry. Alex, my mother is sick again. I don't know how to help her. And she burst into tears. What about your father? He died a few years ago. And my mom? She's not feeling well on her own. Alice, everything will be okay. I tried to hug the girl and held her to me. Alice cried on my shoulder. There was almost no one else in the dark corridors of the college. Somewhere else, I could hear conversations and footsteps. But in this corridor, we were standing all alone. Alex, and I'm being threatened. Why? Mom took the money. She can't give it back, and I don't know where to get it. They're threatening to seize our apartment. Alice, let's go to my place. I can't go on the subway. I'm scared. Everyone will be watching. I'm crying. Okay, let's take the car then. So I put my arm around the girl's shoulders and walked to the subway, trying to flag down the passing car. Back at my house, I laid a crying Alice on my bed. She was lying with her face down in the pillow and continued to cry bitterly and tearfully like a little baby. I sat and stroked her head. She seemed to me like a defenseless little girl. I wanted to protect and comfort her. When she finally fell asleep, I lay down, wrapped my arms around her, and fell asleep myself. When I woke up in the morning, she was gone. There was a note on the kitchen table. Thank you, Alex. I'll call you. We'll definitely see each other. I was starving, so I looked in the fridge. Miss Forrest's cutlets and her yesterday's soup were found in the trash. Oh, Alice, I thought. Well, I made some eggs and immersed into thoughts. So, I had one more day. Yes, I wanted to break into the apartment. Hardly anyone would care about the noise in the entryway, especially since the neighbors were expecting workers to move in. After an hour of buying the necessary tools, I went up to the 4th floor of my building. All right, let's do it. It took me half an hour to open the door. When I entered the apartment, I was surprised at what I saw. The furniture was untouched. It seemed as if someone had lived in the apartment and had recently left. There were no belongings though. The bathroom was white and clean, as if nothing had ever happened there. And there was absolutely no dust in the apartment. What was falling around here? I made my way to the room above mine. There was just a bed, an empty bed. Nothing could fall in here. Nothing at all. For some reason, I had the crazy idea of spending the night here to find out what was going on. I walked around the apartment. My footsteps sounded quite rumbling. What's in here? I suddenly thought. A chest under the kitchen table caught my eye. I didn't pay attention to it at first. The chest was locked. I had to knock it down, and what I saw there made me shudder. 2 urns with ashes, and a death certificate of Rose Williams, and a second, apparently her daughter's one, and an album of photographs. Before I had time to read the second death certificate and open the album, I grabbed for the ringing cell phone. How are you feeling? It was Miss Forrest's voice. Bad, I said abruptly. Very bad. Why don't I come over and get you a snack? Robbie will be waiting for you at work next week. I warned him I'll take care of you. All right, Mallory. And when are you coming? Later in the evening. Mrs. Forrest, do you know who owns the Williams apartment now? I asked all of a sudden. Mallory's voice suddenly became rigid. To my husband. The girl that died was his daughter. We did a DNA test after she died. He's the only heir. All right, it's your business. Of course you may come. I'll be waiting for you. For some reason, I didn't want to meet with Miss Forrest in private. There was something about her that made me tense. Maybe it was a metallic tone in her voice that I had never heard before, or the insistence of caring. I took the album with me, hoping to look at it at my leisure, and went downstairs, closing the door to the other person's apartment carefully. At home, I started to feel queasy again, so I laid down and fell asleep. There was too much news, too much that I didn't feel like dealing with right now. When I woke up in the evening with a heavy head, I texted Alice and suggested she come to my place. After receiving a short text message from her, "Yes, I will be there at 11. I called Miss Forrest. Her visit to me was delayed, so I decided to go and meet my friend. As I approached the subway, I saw a skinny Alice who was trying to pick up a woman who had fallen. The woman was drunk, mooing, and covered in mud. I recognized her as the same beggar I had poured all my change into her hand a few days ago. "Alex, help me. Please lift her up," Alice almost cried. "That's my mother." I rushed to help her. I didn't ask any questions, but simply supporting the drunken woman, together with Alice, dragged her to my house, helped her up to the apartment, opened the door and saw Mrs. Forrest standing in the corridor with a pot of soup. What happened next defies all logic. Seeing me in the company of two women, Mallory shrieked, dropped the pot. The soup instantly spilled on the floor. Stepping back, as if trying to escape, with a wild expression on her face, she slipped on high heels and hit the head on the night table, ridiculously waving her hands. We heard a loud cracking sound. It was Mallory's head. I rushed toward her, letting the drunken woman sit on the floor and shouting, "Alice, help!" But when I turned around, there was no one at the door, and Mrs. Forrest, lying in a puddle of soup and blood flowing from the back of her head, was already dead. It was later, when the police and the ambulance came, called by a frightened old lady from the second floor, who had not yet time to go to sleep and was not wearing her earplugs, graying even more from my screams to the whole damn entrance. After the interrogations and examinations that were conducted on me to exclude the presence of alcohol and drug intoxication, so strange was my condition, which later revealed in my body the poison found also in the cutlets in the garage and in the soup spilled by the caring Mallory. After several days of utter shock, both to me and to Uncle Rob, who had learned that his wife was willingly or unwillingly implicated both in his daughter's suicide and in the attempts to poison me, I realized whose eyes reminded me so vaguely of those of Alice. The eyes of the bewildered and miserable Uncle Rob, the day he learned of the death of his beloved wife. Oh yes, his daughter's name was Alice, and in that very photo album, which I took from William's apartment, I found a few days later, after Miss Forrest's death, a picture of that tall, gentle blonde in skinny jeans. "It was nice to meet you, sis,"